Cool. Okay, we are now live on the air, so I'm guessing that means that this is going to go up on YouTube now. So, and for those who miss it, they get to hear what we're talking about. Okay, so I'll have a look at some of the written questions first, and we'll just take it as it comes. Um, cool. Okay, so the first one is from Tom. Is this the right room for an argument? No. It's probably the wrong room for an argument. Um, cool. Tom's just being funny. Um, so the next one is from Nathan Geary. This is, let me just do that. Where did you find your inspiration for this grand quest? So that's a really big question. It might be worth being more specific. So there's a few bits to it. So you've got the actual design to make a role-playing game is one part, and then you've got the inspiration for like the settings and the rules mechanics of that. But then there's also the business side of it, the Kickstarter, the actual paying for printing and art and things like that. So, bit of a big question. So, let's start with the game mechanics. So, I might just talk about that one. So, I grew up playing RPGs with my friends as a teenager, and we played a lot of a game system called Hero. So if anyone knows anything about Hero, it's basically one of the most complicated RPGs out there, and it's specifically designed for superheroes. That's kind of its main thing, but it's a generic system, so you can kind of do anything with it. It's a points buy, and anyway, so that's what we played, but we very rarely played Hero how it was intended to be played. We actually homebrewed it. And as we got older and older, our homebrews got more and more elaborate until we got to a point where we were basically inventing our own role-playing rule systems, but using Hero system as kind of a bit of a skeleton to that. So I probably think growing up in that kind of an RPG culture is probably what inspired me to make my own rule system. And I've always liked rules and mechanics and things like that. So I'll play computer games, and I'm very interested in the mechanics and the maths and how that works. And I really like tabletop games. I really love board games. And so all of these things mixed together. So, yeah. So what happened is about 4 or 5 years ago, I started designing my own role-playing system, and we had sort of a fantasy system and a sci-fi system. And I tested the fantasy one out for about a year or so, then I tested the sci-fi one out, and the sci-fi one just seemed to resonate with people a lot more. So that's the one I ended up running with. So and I think it kind of just grew from there. So I kind of did that. Then I've got my graphic design background. So I'm used to bringing other people's ideas and desires and sort of projects to life. So I applied that to my own system. Yeah, and then just kind of got a bit more momentum, bit more, and then eventually. Kickstarter came to Australia, which was a big thing and a big surprise, and then that was probably the turning point where I'm like, okay, I think I can make this thing happen. I think I've got the skills that I need. I know the people that at least get started, and that's kind of where it happened. So I hope that answers the question. It's a very good question, so maybe people should be maybe be a little bit more specific if you're looking for something that I didn't answer. Okay. So next question I've got is from Powell. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. Um, Dude, so thanks for asking this question. So this question is, let me just bring that up. Personal professional achievements often have clearly defined thresholds, but Kickstarter campaigns are long climbs followed by months of additional work. Have you found the time and felt the trigger yet to celebrate the fact that your creative dream has come true? Um, That's a really good question. And I would probably say that it's only very recently that I've really started to feel the excitement. So this has been a lot more successful than I expected. Um, I am a first-time RPG publisher. While I've done books before and I've had a fair bit of experience, this is still a new IP, a new rule system, a new publisher, and to get this much support from people, I think has really blown me away. But that's really hard to take the time to actually enjoy it. So I really enjoyed it to start off with, that whole getting funded in 12 hours thing, big adrenaline rush. But I kind of feel like the first 2 weeks were a bit of a blur because I all of a sudden had to spend a lot of time talking to people, which I really enjoy, but then also setting up my stretch goals, finalizing those, and actually planning a bit of a campaign because I started to get a bit of a feel for how fast it's going, how much money's being raised at what speeds, and what people were looking for. So after I kind of got that helped a lot. And then all of a sudden I announced a second book, the Antagonist Archive. So then I was like, okay, we've got to raise money for this now, and then can I plan it? Can I plan it right? So what happened about a week ago is I finally got to a point where like, okay, I've raised enough money. I'm confident that I can do these 2 books, have them all done up in 5 months' time. So the reason I say 5 months is because I've got to send it to the editors and then the printers, and then it's got to get shipped. So there's a shorter time frame for me to do it. I think I can see why a lot of Kickstarters do fall into a trap of continuously promising more, and that was something I was very tempted to do. So I think if I kept offering more books, and then if I kept just offering more things like more minis, more adventures, all that sort of stuff, we could have raised a lot more money than what we have at this point, but I wouldn't be confident in my ability to deliver to the quality that I wanted. And at the current moment, I'm very happy. Everything I've got planned out, I'm very confident with, very comfortable with. So yeah, and that helps me feel a little bit more excitement. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question there, Paul. Let me just check the chat. Okay, yep. Cool. Okay. We have another question here from Jeremy Cunningham. So this is, what is your favorite board game, and did any board game mechanic influence your mechanics for Fragged? Yeah, my favorite board game. So I think my favorite board games haven't really influenced Fragged a huge amount directly, mostly because I go to board games for a different experience than a role-playing game. So my favorite board games, I really like a game called Cyclades. It's a Greek game where you like move men around, build cities, and I like that one because it's kind of got bidding and a bit of mind games with the other people playing it, and I think that really appeals to that side of me because I kind of like those social aspects, but it's also got resource management, and I really like that. In terms of board game mechanics that have influenced my mechanics, No, I don't think so. Not from board games. I think the things that I've primarily taken away from board games is I really like the how they mesh mechanic and theme really strongly together, and I like the use of icons, and they've got a great way of communicating with people, which RPGs often don't have that strong connection because RPGs are so big and so broad. They'll often let the graphic design side um, fall away, which is really unfortunate. So that's probably the main thing I've taken away from board games. Um, One thing that's probably influenced my mechanics more than board games, though, is tabletop war games or skirmish games. So stuff like I mean, of course, the Games Workshop stuff. I really like that. The idea of more team and all those sort of things. Um, I like some of their approaches, but not hugely influential. They're a different sort of game. I hope that answers your question. Man, I could list a bunch of my favorite board games, but I might do that afterwards. Um, okay, so we've got another question here. This is from uh, Nathan Geary. I love the videos you do. Wondering if we'll see more in the near future. Okay, so those videos, I did those videos myself, and they were my very first go into video. So I'm just gonna go to cameraman for a second. Oh, sorry, to the control panel. I just want to set up something. I'm just going to turn other people's video feeds off. Give me one quick moment. Um, Sorry, just a second. Okay. Cool. Um, so the videos, yeah. So I don't know much about video, but I'm a big believer in video because I believe the video more so than nearly any other medium has the ability to communicate more information, and that's why you see a lot of websites with videos on it. You just go to them, hit play, bam, video. There's a reason why Kickstarter has a big plug for like has a big space for video. That's the first thing you see because people go to it. They may not read your text or look at your images, but they'll hit that big play button because it's a very easy easy form of gaining information from people. So I saw that value, and even though I had no experience with video, I still want to dive in. Um, Now those videos. Those are the core ones that are up at the moment, but I really want to add more. And the problem with video is that they take a long time to do because basically it's just my computer rendering time. My plan for those videos is to have a full set that is going to explain pretty much every single rule in the rule book. It's not going to give you the numbers, okay, or any of the charts, so you definitely need the rules book, but it's going to explain the rules. And the reason I'm doing that is because one of the easiest ways to learn a rule system is to have someone tell you how to do it, someone to stand next to you and show you. And since I can't do that with everyone, I figure video is one of the best ways to do that. So if you're a GM and you're trying to recruit players, then you can send them to YouTube and show them the videos, and that's how they can learn the rules. Like they can learn most of the rules, like an easy 95% of the rules from the videos. That's my plan. So definitely going to have more videos, but it's just a matter of time because, like, do I spend time on the book or the art or with writing or doing videos? And there's just a lot of things. So I'll slowly get more and more done. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, I got another question here from Tom, Tom Killingbeck. I noticed your video for the Kickstarter included minis from the Infinity line. are you an Infinity player? And have you played EVE Online? The four-nation politics and balance seems quite similar. Okay, so first thing is, I love the Infinity minis. I think they are by far one of my favorite sci-fi mini productions, and I've talked to them about doing some sort of arrangement between them and Fragged, but it doesn't look like that's going to work out. Okay, so that's the reason I'm using the Infinity minis. Have I played Infinity? Unfortunately not. I have seen a few of the videos, looks really interesting, and if I had more spare time and I knew some other players, I'd be up for it. I love little skirmish games. I think that'd be great. The second part of this question is, and have you played EVE Online? The four-nation politics and balance seems quite similar. Okay, so yes, I have played EVE Online. In fact, I've played EVE Online for a long time, and while I've got a giant soft spot for EVE, and I still like to read about EVE Online, I don't play it. In terms of its four-nation politics, that sort of similarity, I think maybe that might have been... Yeah, I think EVE Online probably did play a bit of an influence in that. And I look at the four races from EVE and look at the sort of balance they got going, and I think that's something I've got similar-ish going in mind. Like, I've got two that are reasonably ordered races, so the Corporation and Legion, two reasonably chaotic races, so you've got the Kaltorans and the Nephilim, but then you've got two who are quite moral, and that's the Legion and the Kaltorans, and then two quite morally ambiguous, that's the Nephilim and the Corporation. So I think it's fair to say that that has influenced me. But that being said, I actually designed this setting with 8 races in mind, not 4. So the way that I actually ended up with the 4 that I've got is I looked at my 8 and I grabbed the 4 that had the strongest cultural traits, and the ones that I thought were racially diverse, and those are the 4 that I chose to include in the core rulebook. I cannot wait to show the other 4, but the other 4 races, especially 3 of them, are fairly fringe. You know, they're not big and in-your-face races, whereas the 4 in the core are much more overt sort of personalities. Okay, just a reminder to people, if you could send any chats to the Fragged Empire channel face, not the Wade one, even though I'm talking from the Wade one. Okay, so that's... I do think that's all the questions that people ask. I'll just give people a bit of a chance to write up any more questions that they might have, and then we'll go through those. Cool. Okay. Did anyone else have any more questions that they wish to post? Let's give it a moment. Cool. I'll just sit here then.
Do we just ask into the chat box on the right-hand side? Is that where you want us to put the questions in?
Hey Blake, thanks for that. Yeah, there's a little Q&A tab where you can write them in. So you've got a chat tab,
yeah,
and then there's the Q&A one.
Cool.
Yeah, that's all right.
Excellent.
Okay, Okay, thanks, man. Just another reminder to people, and I'm just because I know we've got a few extra people have just joined us. If you don't want to accidentally have yourself come up in the display, you might want to turn your audio and your camera off, just in case. Okay. So we've got another question here from Tom. Where did your interest in politics and culture come from, and does this play out in your real life or only in fantasy sci-fi settings? Okay, so thanks, Tom. This is another question that came up from a Reddit Q&A that I did, and people were asking where some of my influences came from. And one of the ones I put up was politics, but also culture. And then Tom's also asked how that plays out in my real life. So let's start with a bit of a core question here. So a lot of my interest in politics and culture come from the way that I'm wired in a bit of a way, but also my upbringing. So I grew up in a Christian home, and I'm a Christian. And around our kitchen table, we were it was very common for us to talk about deep topics. So my father would always talk about politics or ask us questions about why we think the way we think, and sort of discussing those sort of deep philosophical questions. Our family never shied away from those. And then that was when I was particularly my RPG buddies. So I grew up in a small country town called Swan Hill, and a couple of my friends, particularly one, his name's Jai, shout out to Jai, he and I would just have massive discussions. And he, I believe, now I'm really sorry if I misrepresent him, Jai was fairly agnostic and left-wing, whereas I was sort of Christian conservative right-wing. But we both really cared for each other, and we had very healthy discussions between us, and we would just talk about everything. And I think those two things, like from discussions with my father and discussions with my friend Jai, are really those things that cultivated an interest in politics and culture for me. So in terms of culture, that's probably why I went into graphic design. So graphic design is all about communication, and to communicate well to a culture and to understand culture and how people, particularly like the visual literacy that people have. So that's probably where those interests came from. So they really do play out. Okay, the second part of the question was also, or are these things only in sci-fi and fantasy? So when I grew up doing RPGs, I often played characters who were quite opposite to me. Quite, I don't know, I'm a reasonably nice guy, and I mean, I like go around. Yeah, anyway, so in games I'd often play quite rebellious type characters and people who are quite disillusioned with the system. I don't know. A bit of a tricky question. We all like to RPG very different types of characters. I hope that answers your question, Tom. Okay, so people can feel free to ask more questions. Ben, if you wanted to ask a question, there should be a little Q&A tab on the left side of the screen, at least it is for me. If you click in there and you can type your questions. I hope that helped.
Yeah, I've found the Q&A tab, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to let me post one there.
Okay, you know what, Ben? Just ask it. I'll listen, man.
Cool. I'm just wondering what it's like working with Medisys.
What's it like working with Medisys? Okay, yeah, really cool. So Chris Birch, he's the guy who runs Medisys. He contacted me a while ago. And I think the thing Okay, so when Chris contacted me, I had already been contacted by several other companies, but the thing that struck me about Chris is, one, he's really nice. He was genuinely interested in my project, and he had a very healthy approach to me in that he was asking me questions about things that would affect me, and in a very helpful way. And he didn't ask for any money. He was like, hey, look, even if we can't work together, just talk to me. And I think that was the thing that's really struck me. It's just very nice, very open. Chris also likes to talk, which is a good thing. That being said, Chris is on the other side of the world to me, or more to the point, it looks like I'm on the other side of the world to everybody else. So I can only talk to Chris late at night, which is his early morning, or my early morning, which is his late at night. So that's a little bit tricky. Yeah, so Chris and I usually like to have a Skype call of at least about once a week. And then we'll send emails back and forth, and Chris helps me. I think one of the most valuable things that Chris has been doing for me recently is just helping me work through stuff, asking me questions about stretch goals, asking me questions about how am I going with like posting up on forums and future plans and certain pitfalls and traps, because he's done 2 very successful Kickstarters himself, so that's been really helpful. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, more than, thank you.
Cool, thanks, man. Okay, so we've got another question here from Jeremy. Are you getting any contacts with US retailers? Would be nice to see Fragged in local gaming shops eventually. Okay, so I think the short answer is no. So Medisys is going to be my primary distributor for my physical books, and he has a lot of contacts in Europe, and he's expanding into the US. So our current plans is, first and primarily, I really want to get the books out to the backers. Now, I can't guarantee I'm going to get all the books to all the backers before it ends up in a store, but I will do my darndest to make that happen. So the plan is that I'm hoping to get, now it's a little bit technical, but I'll skip over some bits. So I'm hoping to get 3,000 books printed, and I'm going to get 1,000 sent to Europe, 1,000 sent to America, and then after the last 1,000, take out the backers, and then the extra couple of hundred or few hundred or whatever's left will go to me in Australia. Now that seems like a really big number, but it's really tricky to get books into stores, and the margins are quite thin for me, but I'm quite keen because I really like physical books, and there's a lot of people that won't be on the Kickstarter, and for this project to really spread, more than money, we actually need players, and we actually need a community, because that's actually, like, we've got the money to do this. Like, we've already raised enough money to finish the books and print them and get them out there. What we really need now is a community base and just people playing the game. And that's really what's gonna make this viable in the long term. So getting into gaming stores is a key part of that. And I can't ignore the US market because it's huge. Australia's tiny. I mean, you guys have cities with a population the size of our entire country. So I'm quite keen to get my books over there. I hope that answers your question. Cool. Okay, so I've got another question here. This one's from the chat channel. Okay. Blake and Romal, you were hoping to do a post up a question. There should be a little Q&A tab on the left,
Yeah,
but if you
mine
can't.
wasn't working.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry about
I
that.
can't, like, for some reason, I can't post anything. I don't know. I might have a plug-in missing or something, but it won't work.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Do you just want to ask your question? I mean, that's easy.
Sure. Yeah. I was just interested. A lot of RPGs these days tend to be going towards a more sort of, I guess, loose narrative style of combat. For example, Burning Wheel or The Edge of the Empire, Star Wars One, games like that have a sort of more narrative focus. Fate, Strands of Fate, those games as well. Um, in terms of like it's a bit more free flowing. What made you go with the route of like miniatures specifically and a sort of tactical approach to combat as opposed to that sort of more narrative, generalized form of combat?
Okay, that's a really good question. So the short answer is I like tactical miniature combat, and so I made a game that I would like. That's the really blunt and short answer to it. Um,
Really?
I really. Oh, sorry, you're going to say something?
Oh, it's a fair answer.
Yeah, and I actually think um, sometimes we can think that games were made because of careful marketing planning and reading your audience and trying to do that a lot. Um, and I dare say a lot of RPG designers and companies would do that because I know that when I posted up a lot of my work and started sharing it around, I tried to make it really obvious. This is a game that has an emphasis, at least one part of it, on tactical miniature combat. And I want to be really clear with that because I find that a lot of gamers who aren't into that are quite vocal online. Not negatively, it's just they feel quite strong, whereas a lot of the people who like tactical miniature RPGs usually don't post quite so much. Um, and and I could see how a lot of RPG designers could read the market and they say, okay, well, people really aren't into this tactical thing. But that's just me guessing. Uh, but that being said, I don't. I've talked about this a couple of times. I do have rules in my game for miniature-less combat, and I posted up a video about this not long ago on YouTube because I'm reasonably happy with the rules, and the reason I've got this is because I do think that it is a perfectly valid and, in fact, a good way to do some combats is without miniatures. So I've got some very light rules in my book for miniature combat that's just dice rolling, just talking, and far more narrative focused because I think some fights should be like that. Um, Whereas some other fights, particularly let's say some boss fights or something like that, a bit more gamey, a little bit more, RPGs are role-playing games, so there's that real game aspect to it. And I'd rather do my boss fight with miniatures just because that's kind of what I like. But for my bar fight, if my players are getting involved in a bar fight, I'm not putting miniatures down. That doesn't need to be done. Cool. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And congratulations on the game, by the way. It looks amazing.
Thanks, mate. Okay, so we've got another question here from Ramal. Question I have is how do you feel about space operas like Babylon 5 and Star Wars, and how do you think one would run in Fragged Empire? The giant fleets and maniacal leaders. So I think a space opera would run great in Fragged Empire. I've heard it being said by a few people that my setting has a strong cyberpunk space opera feel about it. So let's say, I'm a big fan of Babylon 5 and Star Wars, by the way, except for the first seasons of Babylon. Yeah, that's a general consensus. I would do at the moment, big fleets, I would use my miniature-less combat. Okay, I would just talk about it generally and make your rolls. But then for those key fights, or let's say your ship is just fighting against one other ship, or that dogfight amongst the big war, I would then use miniature combat for that sort of stuff. In terms of the non-combat stuff of space opera, and this is important because it's not all about fights and miniatures. I think that could also work quite well because my game is quite skill heavy, and in terms of social interaction, it's actually broken up a little bit more. I have no charisma attribute. Your social skills are dictated by your culture skill, your conversation skill, and your leadership skill, and then you've also got psychology. So you've got a big breakdown in skills just for the social part of it. So if you really want to do big diplomacy and all that sort of stuff, and you could have all of your players be good at social stuff but in a slightly different way still. And I think that's really good for space opera because you want that sort of thing. Does that answer your question, Ramal? Cool, thanks, man. I cannot wait for the new Star Wars. Sorry. Yeah, anyway, we won't get on to that one. Mark's asked another question. On a retail note, I know Russ at Good Games, CBD, has done a number of retail orders with other Kickstarter projects. So this is Good Games in Melbourne. So I actually have been in email contact with Russ, and he's currently on holidays, and he'll be getting back in August or something like that. He's actually an old buddy of a friend of mine, one of my clients actually from my graphic design work. So I'll be getting in contact with him. In terms of taking retail orders, I'm not taking those through the Kickstarter. I'm having people send me private messages, and then we do that sort of stuff. Cool. So Ben also asked a question. How does Fragged handle FTL? So this is how it handles fast and light travel, and this is a reasonably important question because a lot of sci-fi is actually defined by its faster than light technology. So in my setting, let's get into some fluff. So we've got the humans over 10,000 years ago. They advanced to a point of a technology singularity. That's the point where technology reaches a state that is sort of incomprehensible and to us would just seem like magic. But their technology advances were in the areas of electronics. It's an important distinction because the current technological advances are primarily in biotech. Yes, exponential advance. So some point during that human empire, humanity fractured reality, creating things called ley lines. So they're these tiny hairline fractures that are massively long, like they span the whole galaxy and we don't know how far they go. And around these tiny fractures, scientific laws are different. And the primary thing is that they enable FTL travel without problems like time dilation or exponential mass increase and things like that. So in essence, you've basically got spaceships traveling really fast. Okay? But if they travel along a ley line, and these ley lines go between solar systems, that travel is really fast. But as soon as you start going off that ley line, and if you have a look at my maps, you can see this a lot easier. The FTL speed slows down a lot. So it's kind of like getting off these super highways. So that's in how it works that way. In terms of game mechanics, ley lines have a connection to psychics, and they facilitate communication, long-distance communication, things like that. Okay, so there's a great deal of mystery around ley lines. I have very purposefully not explained fully how they work, but the general consensus is that it's creating some sort of a fracture between our reality and a alternate reality or another universe. And some of their scientific laws are seeping through into ours, but likewise, maybe some of our scientific laws are seeping through into theirs. So the primary reason I've done this sort of thing and not explained a lot, because I really want it to be a source of fantastical mystery, because it's a thing that not even the Archons understood. And hopefully that'll generate a lot of plot hooks for people and ideas for things. Okay, so I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat. I'll see if I can keep up with them. So, got another question from Ben. What does the ideal adventure look like in Fragged? So, okay, despite the fact that Fragged is quite broad in terms of the types of adventure you can have, there is still a middle ground or a common sort of game. And that's primarily going to look like a lot of those things that I mentioned at the start of my Kickstarter page. So I've got some sort of list of inspiration. So things like Blake 7 and stuff like that. So you got the kind of this ragtag band of adventurers going around a spaceship. So you get a spaceship. It's about the size of a Millennium Falcon. You have 4 to 5 crew on this spaceship flying around doing missions. Okay, so that could be, for example, doing trading, or doing like exploration of ruins and visiting new planets, or you could be mercenaries or something like that. So, and your spaceship will often, it's your home base. So it's not really, spaceships in Fragged Empire are a lot more advanced than a lot of stuff like, okay, the Millennium Falcon, it's got a lot more stuff, because in your spaceship in Fragged, you're going to have not only cargo space, but you're going to have labs and workshops and bunks and armories and things like that, and you've got a lot more weapons and bigger shields, okay? So hopefully that answers your question. That whole ragtag band of adventurers going around a spaceship, getting up to nonsense. Cool. A question from Rumal. Have you had a chance to look at or play Rifts of Palladium games? Unfortunately not. No, I haven't. Sorry, that's a short answer for that one. The last few years of mine have been really taken up with this, so it's been a while since I've really bridged into some other RPGs. Cool. So another question from Paul. I'd love to know whether you tinkered much with Kaltoran's spiritual side yet. I recall you mentioning it. You were going to look into religions in future books rather than core. So just wondering. Okay, so religion is not a major theme in the core book. Major themes in the core book are much more to do with politics, economics, biotech, and this whole survival. We've just got out into space. You do have spirituality a little bit. So the Kaltorans have ancestral worship, and that's really closely connected to their genetic memories and their big emphasis on family. Also, their society is run by matriarchs and patriarchs. That's their political leaders. But you've also got, it's not quite so obvious, but there's a subtle religious side to the Nephilim as well. But that's much more of almost a borderline religious approach to science and personal genetic advancement. in future books, I really want to flesh this out a lot more. So a couple of my races that I've got planned for a future book have religion as a major theme for them. So I won't go into details for that, but for one of those races, their spirituality is much more to do with their themselves and internal, whereas you've got another race which is far more external religion. So it's not about them, it's about the spiritual being outside of them. And I really wanted to leave that to a later book to really flesh that out. And in that book, hopefully, I'll bring out the Keltoran religion a lot more too. But I also want to bring out some of the other things in the other races, which is what are they living for? I mean, geez, the corporation basically worship money. Yeah, cool. Hopefully that answers your question. One second. Oh, apparently our Google Plus is full. We've hit our limit of people that can join. That's all right. They can listen in on YouTube. Okay, so I think that's all the questions from the chat channel. Okay, I'm going to go to the Q&A now. So we've got a question here from Jer. It's, let me just read it. Since you used house rules in the games you used to play, how hard would it be to use house rules in Fragged Empire? Let's say much more focus on combat or leveling would have much larger effect on characters. I think I'm struggling to answer that question completely. I feel like you're asking something specific, but I'm not quite sure. I really encourage house rules. I think pretty much every RPG should be house ruled. Because RPGs are so big and they cover just so much ground, there's too much there to be fully covered in rules. Also, you'll find that GMs really like to play a slightly different style of game. I would really encourage house rules. I think that's why I really want to have very solid core mechanics. But that being said, house ruling is just play testing. You need to make a rule, have a bit of a fiddle. I'm really hoping that we can get a bit of a list of house rules that people like to play with up on a website or something like that. Right at the start of my book, I've got a sample of 4 different ways you can play Fragged Empire. So I've got a standard game, a game for horror, a grand space opera type one, and like a survival or something. I think that's off the top of my head. Oh, no, wait. A tactical combat game is my 4th one. And those are primarily intended to give an idea of how people could house rule the game. Hopefully that answers your question. Let me just so Paul also asked something in the chat that I want to talk about, is that you've seen no Archon art. I've actually got an art piece of the Archons sitting on my computer, and I hope to be able to share that. Ben also asked a little bit more about a horror-styled game. So, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to bring up my book on my computer. Give me one moment. Just 1 second. Okay, so I've set it as a survival-styled game. So the way that I've got horror works in this is you've got less attributes. It's a greater emphasis on spare time points. and less emphasis on resources. So the way that it works is you have less resources, but you get a lot more spare time points. But you've also got to spend spare time points on things like refilling ammunition and things like that. And all enemies deal a little bit more damage. So generally, you're looking at a game that's a little bit more lethal. Not very big guns. You've got a lot smaller weapons, but you've got a lot more spare time points, so you can get a lot of modifications and lots of little bits of things. And that represents you scrounging around for stuff, and you're not going around with a big minigun or anything like that. Also, any weapon with infinite ammo or infinite clips costs a lot more in a survival or horror-style game. So that's mechanically how that works. In terms of setting, I think this setting just plays it well to horror automatically. I mean, as soon as you throw in the Nephilim and you've got that whole post-apocalyptic exploration themes and genetic engineering, like I could think of a dozen horror games or horror missions just off the top of my head. Cool. So hopefully that answers your question there. Another question here. So, it's just okay. That's not up there. Let me go back to the Q&A. Sorry, I'm jumping around. It's a bit hard to read the chat and talk. So I got a question here from Gyan. When will there be unlocks for Roll20 integration? Okay, so I've never actually played with Roll20. I prefer to play with players around a table, but I know plenty of friends who play online, and I can really see how that's the only way that some people can play, and it's really helpful for long distances and things like that. I've had a look at Roll20, and I'm very impressed, actually. I think it looks quite nice. So I'd be keen to get some Roll20 stuff going in, but I don't really want to do that as stretch goals or unlocks as part of the Kickstarter, primarily because it's not something that's in my immediate skill set to be able to deliver. Instead, what I'm hoping to do is I'm hoping to set up a section on the forums for people who can help me set up something for Roll20, like start setting up character sheets and what do they call those things where they just like automatic calculate rolls and things like that. And then what I can do is that I can go to my artwork and I can start providing art and icons, because I can make up icons really easy, and I can start creating those visual assets. I've also, because I've been working with Tabletop Audio for doing soundtracks, which those guys are fantastic, you really need to check them out. I can use those soundtracks and we can put them straight into Roll20. So, short answer is, I'm not going to deliver the whole thing, but I can work with the community and facilitate that, and I reckon it could be done reasonably easy, because there's people out there a lot more talented than me with that sort of stuff. I'll stick to the art, the audio, and the assets, and other people can do the other things. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so we've got another question here from Jeremy. How are the spacecraft battle rules coming along? Okay, so this has kind of been that thing, like, rules are written, except for the spaceship rules. So the spaceship rules would actually already be finished, except for the fact that I started Kickstarter. In broad strokes, they're mostly done. It's a matter of balancing numbers, so getting weapons and armor and shield stats and things like that to get all that worked out. The stuff for like workshops and cargo and things, that's already done. The feel of the combat's already set. I'm hoping that my current plan is Kickstarter, take a short break, afterwards. Then jump straight into playtest, get a forum set up, and as soon as that starts to get going along nicely, then I'm going to do some spacecraft rules, get those finalized and send them out to playtesters. I'm probably going to do a video on it and upload that to YouTube before I release the rules. That way people can get a bit of an idea of what I'm going for. In terms of talking about the spacecraft rules, I can give you a pretty quick overview of what it's going to be like. So you basically got people set into each station, so like engineering, command, or operations, and then you're all making roles as a team. So one guy's piloting the ship, the other guy's sort of locking on and doing scans, while the other guy's doing engines and thrusting and repairs, and then someone else is shooting. So it's got that real teamwork element to it, and I wanted to have a very different feel to personal combat. So in personal combat, oops, sorry, I dropped out there. I'm actually running my video and audio on my iPad. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, hopefully that answers the spaceship question. Okay, so I'm just going to jump over to chat, and just let me see if there's any more questions here that I've missed. Okay, so I'll start with one from Ben. Ben's got a question here. What distances do space battles take place at? Okay, so this is something that I'm actually a little bit proud of. The spaceship battles can actually take over lots of different distances. So when you get basically it's dependent on the amount of gravitational forces and particles in space. So okay, space is actually, like, despite the fact that space is really big, it's actually not quite as empty as people always think it is everywhere. So if you have a space battle close to a planet or some other sort of spatial body, like an asteroid belt, the space battles are going to be over much smaller areas because you've got more particles in the space and more gravitational forces. And so what this means is that your sensors are all smaller, like less distance, your guns less range and stuff like that. And also because space is all about your relative movement to other space, like space combat, it's all about relative. So if both of you, two spaceships are fighting, and you're both going at huge speeds, then you can, it's all about your speed difference relative to each other. So if both of you are going at huge speeds, then your fight can be over a huge area. But if both of you are moving at slower speeds, then your fight's going to be in a smaller area. So if you go out into dead space, like that space between planetary bodies or other objects, then it's going to be much bigger area you're going to fight over. But as soon as you go close to a planet, much smaller, which is really good for an RPG setting because it means you can have those small fights and those big fights. So you can have a small fight where one half of the map represents your planet, okay, Or you can have a bigger fight and where you could actually be like circling around a planet, like draw a circle in the middle of your map and say, hey, that's the planet. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so yeah, and I think that actually reveals a little bit of my approach to space combat in that it's not hard science, okay? Because hard science, I don't think it makes that fun of a game. But I think a little bit of science helps, and particularly because this game has, I mean, it just helps make the science fiction side of things more flavoursome and more interesting. Cool. Okay. Hopefully that answered the question. So Ramal also asked a question, and if you can, ask your questions in the Q&A section, not the chat. It just helps. How would you handle giant robots like Robotech, Pacific Rim, MechWarrior in Fragged Empire? Okay, so this is something I have thought about a bit. I think the short answer is I don't think the system supports that. I think if I was to ever do giant robots or some sort of ground-based vehicular combat, then I would need to create another combat set of rules. Just like I've got personal combat rules and then spacecraft combat rules, I would need to do another one. I think 2 is enough for now. I'm not writing it off, how I've never done it. In fact, a really earlier game version of Fragged did actually have robots in it, giant robots, but the current one doesn't. Sorry. Paul asks, is there any sort of central government policing force in Haven system that would be recognized by all races? No, there's not. The most organized force is the corporation, and the corporation hire the Legion a lot to enforce laws, but there is no central government system. There's a lot of area that's, yeah, and I mean laws are going to change all over the place, and I think that adds a lot of flavor to a setting because, yeah, it means that players can get away with a lot more sometimes, but I think that's okay. I think because of the resource system that I've got, it works. Okay, so just checking through the chat to see whether there's any more. Cool. Okay, I want to go back to the Q&A. Okay, so I've got another question here from I'm not pronouncing your name right. I'm sorry about that. You mentioned that you are creating rules how to make new traits. Okay. Was this coming out in the Antagonist Archive or Antagonist Archive 2 books or some later supplement? Okay. So I want to put rules in to help GMs to create new pieces of equipment and new traits. Unfortunately, space in the core rulebook is at a premium in terms of how many pages I've got available, but and I had to cut those things out. So what I'm most likely to do is once the main books are out and have been play tested a lot, I probably just going to stick those up on my website for free because I don't think there would be anything more than maybe four or 6 pages, and it's mostly just going to be dot point. Here's the anatomy of creating a trait. Give a plus, and I mean I can tell you the broad strokes right now. Give +1 to 2 different skills that don't include itself. Give some form of special unique bonus. That's how it works. If it's a scientific skill, sometimes it will have an additional +1. Mostly this is because science skills aren't rolled as often. Say, for example, awareness. You're always rolling awareness rolls. But let's say you've got planetoids as a science skill. You're not going to be rolling planetoids that much. So science traits are just a little bit more statistically stronger than the other skill traits, just because they're not rolled as often, which makes them balanced. In terms of weapons, small weapons are damage 3, medium weapons are damage 4, heavy weapons are damage 5. Then you can play around with the rest. Those are the broad strokes, and I could put that in a PDF. I don't need to put that in a book. It's just nice to put that sort of stuff up for free for people. Cool. Okay. So I got another question from Paul. Man, this Q&A thing, this Q&A app, Google Hangout app, doesn't seem to be working very well. I think you can click Allow up the top. It's probably blocking the plugin. You're using Firefox, but that's all right. Okay, so Paul's got a question. What are your plans for releasing the Protagonist Archive, another Kickstarter? Okay, so those who have been following the Kickstarter really closely will know that I've already stated my loose plans for future books. So at the moment we've got the core rulebook, and then we've got the Antagonist Archive. And so the Antagonist Archives, they tell you about NPCs, factions, and locations for players to contend with. The next books I hope to release, and these are just working titles, I might change these, is the Protagonist Archive, which I will have 4 additional playable races in and have much more friendly stuff in it. So sort of like for allies and friendly factions and spaceports and bars and things like that, stuff you players want to go to rest and things like that. The main thing about the Protagonist Archive will be the 4 additional playable races. Then I'm hoping to do a Knowledge Archive, so that'll be like science and technology and exploration and like maps and things like that. And then I'll probably do some form of, I think I was calling it like, I don't know, like the Void Archive or something, and that's to do with like super deep, dark, ancient secrets, mystery, very high level type stuff. So the plan is let's finish the first 2 books, and then I'm going to start working on the 3rd book. I really can't say. I mean, ideally, I really can't say when I'm going to release the Protagonist Archive. I mean, off the top of my head, I probably think I'll do it as part of the next Kickstarter. So if I do another Kickstarter, I hope to do minis and the Protagonist Archive. And that way it gives something for everyone. So those who are really into the setting and the rules and aren't so much into minis, an extra book for them. And those who are into minis, it allows me to do a dedicated Kickstarter so I can do a proper job. Cool. I hope that answers your question. Sorry it's not very specific. Okay, so I got another question from Ramal. Last one for him. What is your favorite type of RPG session to run, and how brutal do you make the critical hits for your crew? I think my favorite type of session is some form of exploration. I just love it, like strange Archon artifacts, or digging out some ruins, or visiting some new Nephilim tribe out in the middle of nowhere and learning to communicate with them. Those are my favorite sort of sessions. The ones that really give people a reason to use their skills and to make lots of different skill rolls. In terms of how brutal I am, I think I used to be reasonably a lot more brutal than I am these days. I think for me, I really look at the story and I think, okay, the goal of this session is not to like not to like have my players just survive. Rather, I think about how nasty is this opponent and how does that add to the story. If your opponent is really powerful or really weak, either one of those should add something to the story and should make sense. If I'm going to have a particularly brutal opponent, I usually like to give my players some form of a head up or a hint, little GM hint. Other than that, I usually like to cause a little bit of damage to my players. I don't want them to get too confident. Players are prone to getting overconfident. So shooting them a couple of times usually helps with that. So I think that's all the questions from the Q&A. Okay, another question. Nope. Cool. Is that all of the questions from everybody?
There's one more over in the Q&A, mate.
Oh, did I miss it? Hey, it just popped up. Okay, give me one moment. I'm just checking something. Okay, so we've got another question here from... okay, since all first gammas were created, can future gammas be born naturally? Interesting question. You know what? I don't think I've actually thought about that a great deal. I think maybe some gammas, because gammas have been designed for a specific purpose. So a Nephilim gamma, for those who don't know, is a Nephilim. They were a particular breed of Nephilim that were created to be more human-like in their appearance, and they were created at most 3 years ago, and they're born with a head full of knowledge, and they're told to just go out there and mingle. I think some of them would be able to give birth and some wouldn't. I think it really just depends on what purpose they were designed for. So if the Nephilim hierarchy who created the gammas thought that gammas having children would somehow boost the Nephilim's ability to integrate with the other societies, I think that could happen. So, for example, if, and I mean this is just theoretical, I'm not going to write this down, this is not canon, this is just ideas for a game. So, if I was to have a gamma that was designed to intermingle with Kaltorans are big about family, okay? And even though Kaltorans have problems with the Nephilim, because the Kaltorans are born with memories of the war, if a Nephilim was to, like, say, for example, breed with a Kaltoran and have a child, the Kaltorans are going to accept that child because they're really big on family. That's huge for them. But if a gamma was designed to integrate with the Legion, probably not able to have children because the Legion would be far less forgiving. In fact, a gamma made to integrate with the Legion would probably be big and strong and tough and be no nonsense, but probably not able to have children because if that gamma had a Nephilim, like a hybrid Legion child, then the Legion are just going to get angry. That's going to upset them, so probably not. Cool, I hope that answers your question. A bit more fluff sort of question there. Okay, so Ben asks, any chance of publishing a campaign down the line? So as part of the Kickstarter, there's going to be an adventure that all the Kickstarter backers are going to get, and then as a stretch goal, we've got another adventure planned. So my goal with those is to explore how they go. It's to work with a couple of writers who've done adventures before and some modules, kind of get a bit of a feel for working for them. And I don't think I'm going to write, I'll probably only write one adventure myself. Maybe I might do more in the future. But at the moment, I think it really depends on whether I can find a good writer. If I can find a good writer who can really do that sort of thing, then I'm like, let's go for it. I'll pay them to write a whole campaign for me. I'll do the graphic design, the art, the marketing. I'll do all the stat blocking and the rules. It's just a matter of finding that right person to work with. And that's actually true about a lot of things. So it's all about finding the right people with the right skills, because this can't be just me. I know where my good, strong skills are, but I also know where my weaker skills are, and I need to find people who can do things that I can't do myself, or at least they can do it a lot easier. Hopefully that answers your question. So a campaign would be great. I'd love to have something like that, because I know that helps people a lot. Cool. Okay, I think that's questions from the chat. Okay. Did anybody have any other questions? Cool. Okay. It's currently 12:30 in the morning for me. I think that might be a good time to wrap it up there. I'll give anyone last moment for a last question. Cool. No, that's right. Thanks very much for coming, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support. I'm really humbled by it, actually, and I'm really excited by how well this project's going. And I think the next sort of 12 months for this is going to be absolutely key. I really want to make 2 fantastic books and to build all of the community infrastructure that we need to run something like this. So a good forum, good website, lots of good information, a couple of good books, and a couple of good adventures. Then after that, we'll see how we go. But it's all, yeah, I'm really happy with this. Cool. Okay. Thank you very much for everyone. I hope you guys have a great night or morning. Okay, last final question. So Jer asks, can you give us a hint about those 4 races you haven't revealed? Yeah, sure. Okay, so no names. One race is a particular breed of Nephilim Alpha, so they're not as diverse as the other ones, and they are religious, and they have a lot of psionics. Another race is a race that can manipulate energy, and they live on spaceships. They've got no home world of their own. Then the third race is a robotic race, and then, I really love that race, and they almost made it into the core rulebook. So close. Then the fourth race are sentient slugs that are like this big, and they construct bodies for themselves, and they're really weird. Cool. Okay. That's a good little tidbit for everyone. Okay. Cool. Okay. Have a good night, guys. Or good morning. Or cool. Thanks very much for coming by.